Let's cross to our panel now in Copenhagen. Martin Agerup is the director of the Danish Center for Political Studies. Layla Belhaj is a human rights activist, and Michala Bendixen is the chairwoman of Refugees Welcome in Denmark. Thanks all so much for joining us. Martin, let me start with you. Some of these measures do sound a bit extreme, but do you believe they're necessary to protect a culture, a society, and an economy that some see as under threat?
No, I don't see. Well, some of them are reasonable, but some of the ones that I think are the ones you're referring to as extreme, I don't see as reasonable. I don't see them as necessary in any way. So
what is reasonable?
I think it's a wrong way to move. Well, it is reasonable to look at the number of immigrant children in some schools and to see how you can deal with that issue. It is reasonable to look at the incentives of local municipalities to get immigrants into jobs, things like that. It is not reasonable to tell women how to dress or to have higher punishment for crimes in certain areas.
You mentioned immigrant children in some schools. What exactly are you referring to there? What's the issue with immigrant children in Danish public schools?
Well, I mean, one of the measures is to if you have some schools that are failing, the government can take over those schools. I think that is reasonable because you can't have failing schools. So some of the measures make sense, and some of them don't.
Okay, let me turn to Layla then. Layla, there seems to be a fair rationale for some changes, according to Martin. Do you agree?
100%, I agree with him. The Danish government, in collaboration with the other parties, uses stigmatization of minorities and poor to abolish the universal welfare efforts that we have here in Denmark. We had it, they crushed it. But the ghetto package, for example, I have for many years stigmatized and demonized the so-called marginalized residential areas, and now integration is used as an excuse to demolish and privatize up to 60% of some of these residential areas. That means that cheap public housing that is accessible to all and is very sought after must be demolished or sold to private, so that those who cannot afford to buy a home will have less access to cheap public housings. And even though the ghetto package has not yet been adopted in the parliament, we see in Aarhus already that the city council's politicians are already discussing plans for demolition of 9 newly renovated public housing blocks. So the ghetto package is not a simple politics. It is going to hit residents who are thrown out of their homes. And we have not yet had any answer from the government where the people should live when their homes are demolished and are being sold.
Okay.
The government says that they want more mixed residential areas. Public housings are for everyone and are very popular, as the long waiting list show. If you want more mixed residential areas, you should build more public housings.
Okay.
We see statistics. Sorry.
No problem. I'd like to get Michala in the mix then too. I mean, Michala, is there some hypocrisy here when the government says they're looking for more mixed areas and they will invest in that, while in actuality they're actually looking for less diversity because the right-wing elements of the government that are becoming more and more vocal and prevalent feel that their more homogenous culture is under threat from this diversity?
Well, yes, you can say that's a way of seeing it, but well, it is a fact that most refugees live and most foreigners live in certain areas, and it has to do with economics, really, because the public housing system is mainly taking care of the people with a low income. And I think in most European countries and also America, newcomers, minorities have a lower economical status than the majority of the population. So there is a connection there.
Okay, Michala, let me ask you this. I mean, from your perspective, why have you and your organization, in a sense, had trouble selling the idea of diversity being of benefit to societies like what we see in Denmark and in other areas that are contending now with very strong right-wing movements? Why is it that people see the homogeneity of their societies as under threat, as a negative thing, instead of embracing diversity and understanding that it makes for perhaps a more interesting culture? Why is that line not selling to the public now?
It is a kind of paradox, I think, that we have a very hostile government policy and a moving forward of the right-wing parties and the nationalists. And at the same time, I think the normal everyday life of the Dane are completely different. I mean, most Danes don't have any problems with meeting foreign cultures and helping the local foreigners that they meet. That's what we hear from all the people we're in contact with. And Denmark is especially known to be a very tolerant and open-minded and relaxed society, supporting personal freedom and individual rights when it comes to sexuality and free media, alcohol, religion, and so on. But somehow Islam has become seen as a threat to all this. Because people see Islam as something very backward and very suppressing of these individual rights. I think that's really a misunderstanding and a misconception of Islam in many ways. Because in surveys, when you ask the foreign population in Denmark, where Muslims only consist of, it's only 4 to 5% Muslims in Denmark, so it's not a very big population really. But if you ask them about their democratic attitudes, they are actually just the same as the Danish population on average. So there is no contradiction between Islam in Denmark and a democratic state surviving as we want it.
Right. Martin, let me ask you, I mean, does it frighten you to see this very small percentage of the population kind of be singled out, and the voices that are singling the Muslim community out becoming louder and louder? It does evoke memories of a very distressing past in Denmark and across Europe when the fascists rose to power under Nazi influence in the 1940s.
I think that's being a little bit melodramatic. I think we do have to acknowledge that there are some problems. I don't think it's helpful to suggest that that this is kind of an extremist movement in general. There are, as in any political in any society, you have some extremists, but generally speaking, people are concerned. They are worried that there is an increasing share of the population that is Muslim. This is something people are not used to. They're culturally different, and there are some problems that I think we do have to acknowledge. I mean, in Denmark, the situation, the economic situation is that immigrants non-Western immigrants are a drag to the public spending. There's a huge spending that is not covered by the taxes that non-Western immigrants pay, because a very high proportion of them are not in employment. Now, that is partly just an economic issue, but it may also be a cultural issue. There are other problems with I don't entirely agree with the statement that Muslims in Denmark have democratic values that are similar to the Danes. There are issues there with, we had problems when we published cartoons, for instance, in Denmark, depicting the Prophet Muhammad. There was a lot of Muslims who wanted that to be illegal. And that goes counter to fundamental Danish principles. So there is a debate here. But what we need to do in Denmark is to stick to our principles in that debate and not introduce measures like forcing Muslims not to wear niqab or burqa, which is against our principles. People should be allowed to dress the way they like.
Okay. I mean, Layla, do you accept, though, that there are some, perhaps, as Martin was saying, some elements in the Muslim community in Denmark that have tainted the entire community with an extreme sort of brush, going back to the cartoons that were very infamously published in Denmark and the riots that erupted? Is there a responsibility on behalf of the Muslim community to also be more accepting and tolerant of the very liberal Danish values that some Danes feel are now at stake?
I don't think it's the same. Cartoons are one thing and clothing are another thing.
Okay, let me ask Michala then. Michala, where is the issue here? Michala, why can't a better middle ground be found?
I agree totally with Martin that we have to stick to our liberal values and our freedom of speech and freedom of mind and everything. And this new ghetto plan, as it's called, it's trying to integrate people by force, and that's not possible. You can't integrate people by force. You can't ban people's way of life to try to change it. What we should do is what we have been doing for many years, and it's actually working well. It's going better and better. We talk about integration in Denmark like it's a complete failure, which it isn't. The majority of the newcomers, the foreigners, the Muslims in Denmark are well integrated. They are working, they go to school, they speak Danish. It's only a small minority that we have problems with and that disagree with the classic Danish values. So I think we should believe in what we have been doing and what is working. Social support in these neighborhoods, more voluntary offers to the mothers. I mean, this idea of sending children to nursery schools against the parents' will is extreme. You can't force parents to do something to their kids that they don't agree with. And I think all foreigners in Denmark who don't speak Danish as their native language, they wish their children to be fluent in Danish. Of course they do. So there's no reason to try to force anything. You should give these parents some good opportunities and explain to them why it's a good idea to do this or that, and to help them support their language, the language with their children, which most of them will agree to and be happy about.
Okay. Martin, let me just ask you then, are what we're seeing here, elements of the government then pandering to a very vocal right wing, which ultimately ends up compromising Danish values in itself, the tolerance, the acceptance that Denmark has always been proud of?
Well, this is not just an issue of right or left wing. The Social Democrats have moved in this direction and agree with most of what the government is doing in terms of integration these days.
Then why have they changed their mind?
The Social Democrats, well, because they need to change their mind in order to gain power in the next election. I think that's a general analysis of all political commentators in Denmark, because there is a concern among Danes about these issues. And I think the concern makes sense. I just think they go about this in the wrong way. I agree that integration is not something that you can forcefully make happen via social engineering top down. It has to come bottom up. I think some of the things that need to be done is that we need to make sure that immigrants have a strong incentive to find a job. And we need to create a labor market that is more flexible at the bottom. Generally speaking, when people speak about the Danish labor market, they see it as very flexible. But the fact of the matter is that the de facto minimum wage is approximately €18, $15. And that is too high for people who come to the country, don't speak the language, are not part of the culture, need to sort of find a way into the labor market. So the last few rungs on the ladder of employment are missing, and it's very difficult for them to get entry-level jobs in Denmark.
Okay, Martin Agerup, I'm going to have to give you the last word. Very unfortunately, we're completely out of time for this segment of the Newsmakers. Thank you all so much for joining us there from Copenhagen.